The clash between Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office has had quite the effect in terms of geopolitical relationships and America's standing in Europe, and most importantly, in the continuing talks that are trying to resolve the Russia-Ukraine war. But most important is the reactions to these very rarely mention the actual significance of the encounter in a way that resonates beyond mere strategic conversations or beyond mere political or social perceptions about how the discussion was handled. My argument is that you cannot understand that conversation, nor can you understand America's involvement in Ukraine over the past few decades, nor can you understand NATO's involvement in this conflict, nor can you understand the idea of a security guarantee without first understanding the intellectual context in which these events are occurring. So in this video, we're going to actually go through that. We're going to explore this context and show how it relates directly to what happened between Trump and Zelensky and Vice President Vance. And then we're going to try to draw some conclusions on how we as thinking people and we as Americans and we also as denizens of the West can resolve this in a manner that is best for the health of our civilizations. But, my friends, before we get into that, I hope all of you are doing well. I'm Christian Watts. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure our channel is successful. As I always mention, we are close to 20,000 subscribers. That is a milestone that we're going to hit. I'm most confident of it. But when we get there, we have to continue to go further because there is a drought. There is a drought of edifying content within the political and philosophical sphere right now, and we really need to fix that problem. And I do believe that our content right here on this channel, Pensive Politics, is the solution to that problem. So my friends, please like, please share, please subscribe. If you want to help support my mission further, you can also donate to me as well, which you don't have to, but you could. All contributions are accepted. Thank you guys so much. Now please enjoy the video. So, as I mentioned, the Trump-Zelensky meeting has been perhaps one of the most discussed events in recent times as of the posting of this video. And it's also been described by many observers as a historic encounter within the Oval Office, because we're not used to United States presidents having such a very tough posture with a so-called ally. We're used to much more conciliatory talks, at least in public, much more diplomatic talks in terms of tone and posture, and much more, I would even say, talks that conform to the general status quo of how these things are handled. But that meeting between Zelensky and Trump was anything but conciliatory. It was anything but rather conformist, and it was anything but diplomatic in tone. It was rather very, I would say, aggressive, but it was also very firm and very stout. And I'll make an observation here before I go to the more important part, is that the United States has had a posture of servility and conformity towards different powers across the world for decades, ever since the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. And we're seeing a drastic shift from that posture towards a much more stout, a much more resilient, a much more autonomous posture upon which a certain idea of American interest is advanced. And I think that's actually a positive contribution, not because I'm a parochialist or I believe that my country is the best country in the world, although America is a wonderful country, that's my personal opinion, but because self-preservation is the first maxim by which any nation subsists upon this world. And if that is not defended and asserted at the forefront of any negotiation, of any alliance, of any partnership that a nation enters into, there is no safeguard to ensure that nation's self-preservation or their people are not harmed by the partnership. It's a very positive contribution. But more generally, there's been a lot of people that have been panning the conversation as aggressive, as pro-Russian, as anti-Ukraine, as unbecoming of the office. There's been a lot of folks that have called the president a Russian asset because of his tone and posture. There's been a lot of folks who have called Vance as well such a kind of name, and so on and so forth. But what they're not understanding is there's a broader conversation to be had. Personally, I don't care about the drama of personalities. And this phenomenon that I call the drama of personalities is actually the primary problem holding us back from enlightenment in the modern day. Because the drama of personalities takes you away from the more difficult and substantive issues that are at play and underlie any given particular problem. So, for example, if someone believes that World War II and its significance was all about Hitler versus Stalin versus the West. They completely misunderstand the significance of World War II. World War II's significance on a broader scale was about how totalitarianism manifests in differing countries and the ingredients that it takes to manifest as well. This is what Hannah Arendt's observation was, her brilliant observation shortly after the war. World War II was about how the world's order was reshaped with one conflict, going towards a kind of unipolar world to a multipolar world to a more unipolar world, so on and so forth. These are the lessons we have to take from these events. If you were to just obsess over Mussolini or Hitler or Hirohito or whoever, your favorite personality, you would absolutely miss the significance of World War II. Similarly, if you were to obsess over Zelensky or Trump or Vance, you are to miss the significance of their encounter. And that significance has to do with a worldview that has been governing Western European, and United States relations for the past few decades called Atlanticism. And in order to understand the significance of that particular event, you must first, of course, understand Atlanticism. And in this video, we're going to get into that right now. So, there are a few reasons, however, that are endemic to the encounter that Trump and Zelensky had that justify why Atlanticism is relevant to this particular conversation. First of all, the United States basis for support of Ukraine is not entirely based on a strategic interest. Here's what I mean by that. Because there is no immediate strategic danger to Ukraine, which has been, again, the territories that are within Ukraine have been disputed for a very long time. Russia has been chipping away at Ukraine territory for a long time as well. And over the past few years, especially in 2014, the election, all that kind of stuff, this has had no material threat to the United States homeland, but it has had a sort of material threat to the sort of European hegemony which exists in the continent. So we have to understand that the United States' interest in Ukraine is not necessarily a strategic interest that has to do with the homeland. It is instead an interest that has to do with upholding a certain kind of hegemony that the United States and Western Europe have over the European nations and have over that entire area. This should then lead us to understand the notion of a security guarantee. During the conversation, the idea of a security guarantee was talked about heavily, and in fact, Zelensky was asking Trump for security guarantees. The demands of several European leaders after the summit have been for the United States to provide security guarantees. You're going to hear that word security guarantees quite a lot. Both security guarantees and the United States' involvement in Ukraine for the sake of European hegemony over that particular area signify significant pillars of the notion of Atlanticism. And so we have to understand exactly what that is. So Atlanticism, it's actually a very blurry term, as many scholars will tell you. But roughly, it is this doctrine that says that the United States and Western Europe, and anyone else who was brought into that similar compact, which I'm going to get into in a second, are stronger when their security interests are linked, when their economies are linked, and also when their values are forged by way of economic and security relationships. Atlanticism was birthed in 1949 at the behest of the Washington Treaty, which of course is now famously known as the North Atlantic Treaty, which created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is called NATO. And when Truman and his Secretary of State and everyone sat down to forge that policy, they were actually quite clear about what vision they were setting forth. So, for example, Truman said that the Atlantic Pact, which again became NATO, would be a, quote, symbol of our common determination, a contract, as it were, under which our new partnership must now proceed. Dean Acheson, who was a diplomat within Truman's administration, said that the United States at that time viewed the desirability of a closer European political unification, and he agreed that no such step as the United States of Europe is feasible at this stage, but rather a series of concrete steps to solidify and extend the remarkable progress already made. What he was talking about was a desire for the American government at that time to bring Europe under this cohesive unit that would make it a strong adversary to any of its adversaries. But that wasn't quite happening, so what happened was the United States and European progress were linked, and that link was solidified through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was solidified through NATO. This is going to become very interesting in a moment, because I think many of you are beginning to see the problems that are inherent within this kind of arrangement. General Manfred Warner, had a more universalist view of the NATO alliance, which went beyond the immediate threat that was posed by Cold War Russia and went beyond to a more broader point that I think is going to signify things right now. He said, for example, that the Treaty of Washington, which created NATO, aimed at creating a permanent community of Western democracies to make each other stronger through cooperation and to work for more peaceful international relations. So the idea of cooperation and having alliances is generally considered to be a rather, not just a necessity, but also a common sense idea in a world full of dangerous people that may not hold your values. But it was not just about responding to a threat. It was also about responding to this sort of mutual desire for Europe to grow as a political entity. John Foster Dulles said, for example, that NATO was to achieve cooperation for something rather than merely against something, which is one of the reasons why it lasted after the Cold War, because it was never really about Russia or the USSR. The USSR was simply a relic that they were using to respond to. It was more so about this desire to permanently bind the destiny of Europe with the United States. So there are a few characteristics of Atlanticism that are actually quite important to understand. The first is this sort of American willingness to lead Europeans into unity. This is what Truman had set out when he signed the treaty. Second would be the notion that American involvement in European affairs is a catalyst for European progress. The third would be the linkage between security guarantees and economic relationships. And the other would be a sort of this desire to create this geographical space of the North Atlantic as this political, economic, and security hub between European powers and the United States. So, NATO and Atlanticism more generally, which is the ideology behind NATO, is not merely about, as so many people have been saying, having a security alliance between states based on that mutual contract. It's more different than that. It's about linking the fates of both the European civilizations and American civilizations together, and doing so that in a way that goes beyond entangling alliance, but in a way that assumes some kind of spiritual destiny that both of them have to fulfill between each other. It is this attempt to say that the United States has to be the catalyst, has to be the crafter of European unity. And this view is against another view which is called Europeanism or continentalism, which argues that the United States' involvement in Europe is actually a bad thing and Europeans should be more self-determination. So you have to understand, the outset of NATO, the outset of Atlanticism has been this sort of permanent bond between the United States and Europe. You can't understand what happened at the White House without understanding this sort of civilizational bond that was artificially created by the people in power at that time. Well, the first thing is very simple. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, whenever a nation enters into an alliance or an agreement, and they do so with not their self-interest or not their self-preservation at the forefront, but with the interests of other nations or other civilizations at the forefront, or even worse, with ideologies that have been birthed by other civilizations that are antithetical to its own at the forefront, that nation can be trusted to disregard the health of its citizenry and disregard its own self-preservation in the process of trying to build up other nations. This is essentially what NATO is. NATO at its conception is a parasitic union created for the United States to be the guarantor, not just of European security, but of European civilizational health, which necessarily saps from its own health, because the principal limitations demands that we cannot be everywhere to everyone, to everything, lest we divide our energy, right? There was this debate over Ordo Amoris. And the principle behind Ordo Amoris, which simply says that you're going to care for those who are closer to you before for those that are further from you, is that you can only do so many different things as a finite being. Well, when you abstract that to the level of a nation, the same exact principle exists. So a security guarantee is based not simply on a strategic partnership that benefits both nations, but in this sense, it is based upon an ideology that says that the United States has to be the guarantor of our civilizational progress for XYZ reason, because it is the stronger power that emerged after World War II. But this is a fallacy, because security is best guaranteed of what the wisdom of the principle of subsidiarity tells us. The security of a nation is best guaranteed by those that actually live within the nation and actually know the nation's needs. See, here's the very interesting thing, because the reason why Europe is freaking out right now is because for years they have not had to actually guarantee their own self-preservation. For years they have been able to run wild with their socialist experiments and craft welfare states, craft these sort of dystopian laws and perspectives surrounding free speech and so on and so forth, without actually having to think about how are we going to defend ourselves against the world. Because Atlanticism basically said that it is the United States' job to ensure this space of mutual cooperation and shared values is created. So what has happened over all of these very many years is that the United States has been the guarantor of their security. But security is best guaranteed when those who have the vested immediate interest in that security are able to defend themselves. For example, let's just break this down to a more interpersonal terminology. Let us say that you have a house and you have a security agency that helps guarantee your security, like many wealthy folks do. Well, that's all fine and well, but when that first barrier is broken, when the security agency is no longer able to provide your security, what do? If you never have the skills, or you never were put in a position where you had to develop the skills to do that yourself, you're pretty much out of luck. Self-preservation can only be guaranteed by the people who are trying to be preserved. It can never be guaranteed entirely by external parties. Not only because of that, but also because there has to be a willingness within the people to preserve themselves. The problem is, my friends, there's not really a willingness if there's never an immediate need put before someone. This is the big problem of a security guarantee. No one but you and your own willingness to defend yourself can guarantee your security. There's also a bigger issue here. Security is not merely a prospect that is secured by the military or is secured by diplomatic cooperation. Security is also a prospect that is secured by ensuring that a civilization's foundations are defended against the ideological and conceptual threats that would seek to threaten them. And unfortunately, my friends, both Ukraine and Russia are what we call old world civilizations. They have a very different civilizational character than the United States. Ukraine, for example, does not favor free speech very much. They do not favor a sort of Republican type of political process. They do not favor freedom of association very much. They do not favor the kind of values that we in America have come to hold as sacrosanct. Russia, for example, does not favor many of those ideas, but it also does not favor the notion of human progress in the same way that America does. There's a reason why Russia has an economy the size of Texas. Not because the Russians are backwards or primitive, because the Russians have prided traditionalism and they've prided provincialism over the progress of the civilization, which is one of the reasons why Russia itself is not an incredibly developed nation. It is not as developed as, for example, a nation like the United States is. One of the many reasons. And so, if there are different civilizational characters and to the people that we're offering guarantees to, well, we're becoming entrenched within their country by virtue of that. And our interests are being guided by their interests, and their interests are a reflection of their civilizational character, and therefore, our civilizational character is being changed or altered or manipulated, or it's being siphoned towards a different civilizational character. It's a parasitism that does not simply have an effect on our GDP or our money, but it fundamentally has an effect on the character of who we are as a people. Washington warned against entangling alliances, but missing from that entangling alliance warning was a sort of warning about what happens when two civilizations that share two different characters are bound together as if they are the same. And this is also the whole problem with the notion that Atlanticism has provided us, where security guarantees and the sort of American role in driving Europeans together is seen as the most important thing, when in all reality, American civilization and European civilization are crafted from two very different cloths. It was the argument of John Adams and Alexander Hamilton and John Tate and other people within the Federalist tradition that America was simply a derivative of the British. But others within the Jeffersonian tradition, like John Taylor, who called America a result of a new science of politics that may have at first had resemblances to its European ancestors, but as it developed, completely took a different direction and changed in so many different ways, so much so that it became alien to its seeds, alien to where it came from. That is one of the reasons why, my friends, we have to understand that diplomatic relationships are not merely about military and strategy and beating particular enemies that have been set up by people. It's also about ensuring that the ability of our nation to exist in a world that is so alien to it is secured and is not threatened even by silent threats, like a seemingly benign security guarantee. This is obviously a very oversimplified or perhaps even very overgeneralized version of Atlanticism. I will be exploring this topic more in future videos, but the most important thing to understand, my friends, is that you cannot save the old world by giving it money. You cannot secure the old world when you're a nation that is based upon New World notions. And Atlanticism makes us completely blind to this by tying up our interests with distant nations and presuming what cannot be presumed without a bunch of leaps that ultimately defy our own self-preservation, that it is the American duty to secure Europe and to build Europe into this sort of political space where it is a formidable, rather than the Europeans' duty to do that themselves. If you understand this, you will then understand why the Zelensky-Trump conversation went as it did, because the Trump administration understands, at least in a very rough sense, that America's civilizational character is important enough to be preserved by strictly asserting its self-interest in all diplomatic conversations, as opposed to focusing on our partners and allies before our own people. Even if you disagree with how the conversation was handled, you must understand that that conversation was handled in a way that does go towards the health of our country, it does go towards the health of the New World more generally, and that does go towards a righteous end. And that righteous end is justification enough, I think, for every president in the future to follow a similar kind of blueprint, regardless of their ideology, of ensuring that America is represented well on the global stage. The short-term solution, my friends, is we have to stop funding the old world. The long-term solution will have to be we have to divest permanently from the notion of Atlanticism, recognize it for the farce that it is, and assert that Europeans must ensure their own destiny, that America will no longer be a guarantor of their own progress. Once that happens, my friends, I think you'll see a much more different situation geopolitically than you see right now. But until that happens, the bill will continually fall on America and the American people to fix problems that really don't concern us directly, and this notion of the superorganism of Western Europe being perpetuated by American dollars will continue to fall from the mouths of European leaders who with indignation claim that it is our job to ensure that they have some kind of civilizational future, when the truth is it is instead their job, their responsibility, and it is not anywhere near being our responsibility. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to ensure that our message gets out there. My friends, if you so wish, I would encourage you to join our Discord server where we're building up a strong group of thinkers and who can talk about ideas amongst themselves. That will also be in the comment section down below. You can also donate to me as well. My friends, study history, study philosophy, you're more convicted, and please stay pensive.